Right. So we are looking at the last chapter of Thomas More's Utopia, and here Raphael says that I have described this Commonwealth of Utopia, where there is not only equal distribution of wealth, but also well-being in the true sense of the term of all people, and there is also justice in this commonwealth. Here now would I say, if any man dare be so bold as to compare with this equity the justice of other nations, among whom I forsake God, if I can find any sign or token of equity and justice. For what justice is that a rich goldsmith or an usurer ought to be shot, any of them, which either do nothing at all, or else that which they do is such that it is not very necessary to the commonwealth, should have a pleasant and a wealthy living, either by idleness or by unnecessary business, when in the meantime poor labourers, carters, ironsmiths, carpenters and ploughmen, by so great and continual toil as drawing and bearing beasts, is can't able to sustain, and again so necessary toil that without it no commonwealth were able to continue and endure 1 year, and so on. So, in most countries, Raphael says, referring to the European countries of course, that we find there is no justice, because the poor people, the labourers, they work very hard, and it is their hard work which makes the country run. Everything runs smoothly because of their hard labour. They hardly have any wealth. On the other hand, jewelers or goldsmiths and many other people who do not labor, who do not do any hard work, but they prosper and they become very rich. Therefore, there is no justice in these countries, but in Utopia there is justice in the true sense of the term. For they be not put to so continual labor, nor their living is not much worse, to them much pleasanter, taking no thought in the mean season for the time to come. So in Utopia, people do not have to worry about the future. But these silly poor wretches be presently tormented with barren and unfruitful labour. No, here More is talking about the European nations, where the idle men, they do not have to worry for the future, but the poor people, they do hard work, but it is unfruitful because they have to worry for the future. And the remembrance of their poor, indigent and beggarly old age killeth them up. So there is no welfare measures when they are not able to work anymore in their old age. For their daily wage is so little that it will not suffice for the same day, much less it yieldeth any overplus that may daily be laid up for the relief of old age. So this question of maldistribution of wealth and lack of equality among citizens is considered traditionally one of the weak points of capitalism in capitalist countries. Why I am using the word capitalism? Because private property is considered sacrosanct in capitalistic societies. So societies which believe in private property, there is no, almost always, no guarantee for the poor people that they would be able to have a comfortable life. They do not get sufficient compensation for their labor. On the other hand, idle people who do not work, they become very rich. So the question of distribution and the question of equity. So equity is one of the qualities that make up justice. So in order to be justice all around, there should also be justice in distribution of wealth. Is not this an unjust and unkind public will, which giveth great fees and rewards to gentlemen, as they call them, and to goldsmiths, and to such others, which be either idle persons or else only flatterers, and so on. So this criticism of the countries which believe in private property goes on, continues, and more looks at it as a system that favors idleness. Now, More was writing when the aristocratic way of life was being challenged by the bourgeois way of life, and as you know that the bourgeois people had a different set of values than the aristocratic people. The bourgeois people, by bourgeois I mean middle class, they valued hard work, they valued industry, whereas the aristocratic people, they could not think of working because their life was mainly a life of status. So they always went by their status as rich men, wealthy men, and wealthy men do not work, rich men do not work. That was the value at that time. Right. Today, of course, this has changed, but at that time, that was the kind of value. And today we have, mostly highly developed capitalistic societies. So you will not find aristocratic people in America, perhaps, as you will find in England. So England, being a much older nation, and the bourgeois ethos of hard work and making profit by virtue of hard work, that percolates the modern capitalistic system. Therefore, you read this chapter thoroughly, because it deals with the question of justice, with the question of well-being of the people, and it proposes the utopian model, a communist model, as opposed to the system that believes in private property. Some more comments on private property. And I doubt not that either the respect of every man's private commodity or else the authority of our Saviour Christ, which for his great wisdom could not but know what were best, and for his inestimable goodness could not but counsel to that which he knew to be best, would have brought all the world long ago into the laws of the will public, if it were not that one only beast, the princess and mother of all mischief, pride, doth withstand and let it. This is a kind of, what can I say, a kind of capitulation. What Moore says that every man's private commodity is respected. Where? In England. So we see this opinion, which is very different to what happens in Utopia. Raphael says that I do not doubt that the respect for private property and the Christian religion, Christ religion, that would have ultimately led to a commonwealth. But it didn't. Why it didn't? Because of men's pride. Therefore we see that even through Raphael, Moore does not dare to say that the English system of economy, or even Christian religion, any of these upholds a communistic way of life, where wealth is commonly owned. So we do not see here an outright rejection of private property. Yet, through the example of the utopians, a different point of view is presented. So here, by way of summarizing, Raphael says that it would have been possible here also, in the European countries also, to establish justice, but it did not happen because of men's pride. This form and fashion of a will public, which I would gladly wish unto all nations, I am glad yet that it hath chanced to the utopians who have followed those institutions of life, whereby they have laid such foundations of their commonwealth. For seeing the chief causes of ambition and sedition with other vices be plucked up by the roots and abandoned at home, there can be no jeopardy of domestic dissension, which alone hath cast under foot and brought to naught the well fortified and strongly defended wealth and riches of many cities. Ambition, sedition, these vices were plucked by the root, by the utopians. And in many countries, domestic dissension, that is belligerence or quarrel, domestic quarrel, that led to the ruin of the nation also. That also is not possible in Utopia. Is more here pointing at the domestic dissension in Henry VIII's own life. Possibly marriages or unhappy marriages would ruin, the governance of many things, and if the ruler also has an unhappy marriage, then that may ruin the governance of the country also. And since More had to give up his life for this domestic dissension of Henry VIII, therefore he can rightly say so. Thus, when Raphael had made an end of his tale, though many things came to my mind which in the manner and laws of that people seemed to be instituted and founded of no good reason, not only in the fashion of their chivalry and in their sacrifice and religion and in other of their laws, but also and chiefly in that which is the principal foundation of all their ordinances, that is to say, in the community of their life and living. The communal life of the utopians, the communistic way of life of the utopians, without any occupying of money, by the which thing only all nobility, magnificence, worship, honor and majesty, the true ornaments and honors, as the common opinion is of a commonwealth, utterly be overthrown and destroyed. So money does not play a role in Utopia. In the Western countries, everything is destroyed because of money, because people become covetous. But in Utopia there is no money, so there are only goods, and there is no private property, there is only common property. In the meantime, as I cannot agree and consent to all things that he said, being else without doubt a man singularly well learned, and also in all worldly matters exactly and profoundly experienced, so much I needs confess and grant that many things be in the utopian will public, which in our cities I may rather wish for than hope after. That is the clue. Why there are strange and bizarre things in Utopia in this book. More does not want his reader to accept the utopians' practices in toto, everything. He wants the reader to be discernible and to make a selection which practices of the utopians are acceptable, which are not. Okay. Thus, More wants his reader to be critical and not blindly think that everything that is in Utopia is acceptable. Right. So we finished the text, and now we can look at the questions. Utopia is an embodiment of humanist rational ideas discuss with reference to Raphael's narration of the utopian's view of war. As I told you that the utopian's view of war is important because the idea of war goes hand in hand with the political definition of a state, in which circumstances war may be allowed or in which circumstances it cannot be allowed. Now, war always mostly stands for destruction. War is very expensive, so it often leads to extortion of money from the people, which the European kings and rulers had the usual practice of raising money by taxing the people for their ambitious wars. So in this work, More presents this idea through Raphael that war should not be indulged in from the greed of conquering other states. So nobody should engage in a war just because they want to expand their empire. Now this, of course, runs contrary to the European idea of the empire, which they borrowed from the Greek and Roman prototypes of empire, the civilizations. So the fact that Alexander was called Alexander the Great, even though history says that he was very ruthless, tyrannical, and by no definition he was a great man. However, in which sense was he called the Great? Probably because he built a great empire. So anybody who builds a great empire, in most traditionally, such a person is considered to be a great man, which is a telling commentary on the Greek and Roman cultures, of which the European culture is an offshoot. And we have seen that this idea of empire building was happily accepted by England and Spain and other countries, France also. And this is kind of synonymous with the Western European civilization. And later in America also, which is a product of colonization, we see that the idea of empire is not absent. So the utopians do not engage in war out of greed, but they engage in war only when somebody threatens their country or their friend's country is attacked by somebody and so on. Now I suppose that if it were possible for men to build a system where there would be no necessity of a war or no necessity of even having armies, that would have been the best. But that still remains more utopian than More's utopia. Because in More's utopia there is an army, the utopians also engage in war. So the idea that there will be no war, that there would be no necessity of an army, that is extremely impractical and idealistic. Unless people change their nature completely, if they follow the Buddhist tradition completely and become totally non-violent or otherwise, it is not possible. So when we see that the utopians engage in war for certain reasons, some malpractices of war also are present in utopia, like making bondsmen or slaves, prisoners of war. The enemy soldiers, they are imprisoned and they are treated as slaves, extorting the people of conquered countries or defeated countries, or taxing the people of defeated countries, and so on and so forth. So some practices the utopians have which are against the ethical norms, against even the Christian norm that one should love one's neighbor. But the moment one accepts war, I suppose one would have to accept these practices also. Therefore, the utopians' greatness or superiority in this matter over the European practice is only marginal. Only we hear that they do not engage in war out of greed. They do not try to conquer other countries and build an empire. But otherwise, they engage in war and they do everything that is necessary or that is conventional with war. Therefore, there remains some, doubtful issues on this matter in Utopia. Comment on More's treatment of the debate on court employment through Raphael's reluctance to be an advisor to a ruler. Now this we have discussed in great detail when we read the first book of Utopia, the debate that takes place at the palace of the cardinal. There this debate is fully fleshed out, and we know that the character More is also there, who also speaks in favor of the British laws. But we know that More himself, the real More, was against accepting a job in the court, a government job. When he was writing Utopia, he was thinking about this. But ultimately he accepted it. But the question is whether philosophers or wise men can at all help in matters of administration, because rulers are not open to listening to advice of the wise people. What is the function of the first book of Utopia? Discuss how the fictional character of More and the paratext of Utopia have special functions. So I told you that the first book of Utopia, which was written later, in the second book we find the actual description of Utopia. In the first book we find this conversation going on at the house of Cardinal Morton, and the debate over public service and so on. And Raphael is introduced, and Raphael refuses to accept public service for various reasons. And Raphael tells the story of many nations that he has encountered in the course of his journey, in the course of his travels. And the different culture and practices of these nations prepare the reader for the story of the utopians in the second book. So the idea is to present a mirror to England. So in some way it is still a mirror for magistrates. To present a mirror perhaps to Henry VIII. You see, this is the face of England, and how Utopia is different from England and other nations that Raphael describes in the first book, how they are different. In the paratext I have commented on that, the letters that More writes to Peter Giles and Jerome Busleyden and others. So these letters, they create a convincing backdrop that the character Raphael Hythlodaeus was a real character, and that More actually had a meeting with him. because these men discuss this issue. So the paratext has the function of providing a convincing background to prepare the reader for accepting Hythlodaeus' cock and bull story as a real story, which is the trick of all travelers' tales, that these tales are presented as real encounters or experiences of strange places. Comment on the title of Utopia. Why does More make it ironical? Can the notion of dystopia help explain the ambiguity and irony in the title? Discuss with reference to some of the absurd practices in Utopia. So you have to speak here of the Greek pun on the word utopia. Utopia with U means no place. Utopia with EU means good place. So either the utopia described by Raphael is not a place at all, it is totally fictional, or it is a much better place than any places we have known so far. So there is this irony here. Why does More make it ironical? Because he does not want to assert in a straightforward manner that there is really this place utopia. And the fact that this place is not true, that fact is hinted by the spelling utopia with a U, which means that it is a no place. So he wants the learned reader to recognize that it is a fictional story, but at the same time he creates all the claptrap, all the devices he takes recourse to in the tradition of literature to present this story as a real story. Otherwise the reader will lose interest. And there is a deeper irony in the fact that only a place that is not there is a good place. The places which are there, they are not good places. What is the significance of the discussion on thieves and vagabonds in Utopia? Discuss with reference to England in More's time. Of course, you will have to speak here of the problem of sturdy beggars, the problem of vagabondage, the problem of the poor in England in the 16th century. But at the same time, you also have to mention that this discussion on the hanging of thieves, that was actually a discussion on the system of justice as it was prevalent in England at that time. And it is quite clear that this punishment for thieves was excessive, because for stealing petty things nobody should be hanged, nobody should be killed, so this is an excessive punishment. Therefore there was no justice for the people. But then why was this excessive punishment there in the first place? Secondly, why was this crime of theft so rampant in England? That is the second question. So that we should investigate. So the answer to the first question would be that private property was held sacrosanct in a country which was the foremost capitalistic country that was developing because of colonization, imperialism and other factors. and in a country where private property is sacrosanct, there even petty theft is considered a big crime. The answer to the second question, why there was so much of theft, to that Raphael himself makes a long answer by analyzing the reason of the crime, the rampant crime, the rampant theft that was in England at that time, the poverty of the people, and he also discusses various reasons why the people became so poor, how the agricultural laborers, they were displaced by the encroachment, how those who used to rear sheep, they lost their pasture because of the encroachment, and thus because of various oppressive practices of the landlords and the country squares, the poor people, the craftsmen, the workers, the laborers, they were becoming poorer and poorer, and therefore they turned to crime, having no other option left. So that does not speak well of the state, of the government, which cannot provide justice, which cannot provide food to people, which cannot look after poor people, and then takes very strong punitive measures against them. Comment on the political thesis of the state in utopia. Does it bear resemblance to a democracy, a communist state, or a republic? This is a very interesting issue. Utopia was primarily looked upon as a political text because the subtitle indicates that it speaks of the ideal state of commonwealth. So which kind of a commonwealth, which kind of a government should be there, which kind of state would be perfect state? So that is the issue. And among the three different forms of government, democracy, republic, and communism, well, I didn't include monarchy here because more or less the state of utopia is represented not as ruled by one strong king. I mean, there is a king, but the king is an elected king. More also talks about King Eutopus, who seems to be like a famous king or an absolute monarch, but we are told only about his welfare measures. But the way the administration is multi-layered, that has qualities of republicanism as well as of democracy. At the same time, there are some communistic ideas also, insofar as there is no private property in utopia. So this part is deliberated in great detail in the first book, or with reference to the second book, not in the first book, in the second book, where utopia, the government of utopia is described. There you can see that all these elements are more or less there. Therefore, utopia is a kind of a mixed form of state. It is neither purely a republic, not purely a democracy, not purely a monarchy or a communism. Do you think the utopian view of religion is the same as that of More? Obviously not. So we have discussed today in detail that in certain respects the utopian religion seems to be similar to Roman Catholicism. In other respects it seems to be close to Protestantism, and therefore it is not More's own religion. If not, why does More present it in this work? Now, this question will not be set because this is my question. So this kind of question is not asked normally in the university. But since I said this question, why does More present it in this work if it is not his own religion? This book has nothing to do with More's own religion. More did not write this book to preach Roman Catholicism. More writes in the context of the Reformation, where there are many criticisms of Roman Catholicism. And like Erasmus, he also joined in the criticism of the defects of Roman Catholicism, but like Erasmus, he won't join the reformist leaders, that is, he won't join the Protestant cause. So he would work from within the church, Roman Catholic Church, and try to reform it, but he will not leave the Roman Catholic Church, he will not become a Protestant. So that is why we find here that some of the criticisms of Roman Catholicism that the Protestants make, they are accepted by More, or they are at least given a space here in this book, as utopians practice some of the Protestant practices, like there is no idol worship and okay. So More also wants to be to have a debate on the issue of religion. He does not accept Roman Catholicism as it stood in his time, nor does he wholeheartedly accept Protestantism. Briefly comment on the view of pleasure in Utopia. So here we will have to talk about Epicureanism, the criticism of Stoicism or asceticism, and how Epicureanism stands for well-being of a person and not for indulgence. How base pleasures are criticized, so higher pleasures are emphasized, and in general there is a strong affirmation, we may say, of the Epicurean point of view over other philosophical traditions. Now, in this also More is tantalizing his audience, because in the Renaissance, the Stoicism was considered the most important pagan contribution in philosophy. It was considered the best kind of philosophical attitude. Epicureanism was, on the other hand, considered by a few learned men to be superior, like Lorenzo Valla and others. So More takes a debatable position here also on this issue. Write short notes on marriage and divorce in Utopia, gold in Utopia, administration in slavery in Utopia. So there will be various topics for short notes on this work. Alright, so I have more or less covered the questions. If you have any questions, you can ask me.
Sir, can you please discuss the 7th question also? Utopia is not just travel literature but a genre in itself, that one.
Okay, so I missed it. Not a travel literature but a genre in itself. So Utopia is presented in this work. The work is presented in the form of a travel literature, because it was the age of travels. We all know the Renaissance was the time when the Europeans were undertaking expeditions to different parts of the globe, discovering new countries, new cultures, and so on. And travel literature is one of the important genres that developed in the Renaissance. There were works in the Middle Ages also, like Mandeville's travels, but they were often fictional, totally fictional. But in the Renaissance, people were undertaking real travels, and actual narrations and descriptions of travel began to be written and published. So we can very easily think of utopia as a travel literature, but it is not a travel literature because the travel here is completely fictional. There is no Raphael Hythlodaeus, there is no travel that he undertakes, it is all fiction. On the other hand, this book begins, we may say, it does not begin, but it makes it popular, this genre of utopian literature. That is, imagining a state which is perfect or which is superior to the present state of affairs. And since there were utopian writings without the term utopia, there were writings which imagined such superior states, like Plato's The Republic or Augustine's The City of God, and so on. So it is not that More invents this genre, but he makes this genre popular, and from his work the term utopia or utopian literature, this term was derived from his work. Now, obviously, the term has something in it which makes it, so acceptable. Utopia, since this word suggests both the impossible and the non-existing, as well as something which is much superior and very good. Therefore, for any work which would imagine such superior world, such works began to be described as utopia. So it popularized that genre. Then the dystopian literature which developed, which suggested that a world which is inferior or terrible in some aspects, that I suppose also was propelled by the success of More's Utopia, because in this work itself there are certain germs of dystopia, certain things which are unacceptable, certain things which are, in bad taste or horrible to us, to our modern sensibility. So utopia, since More's Utopia is not totally acceptable to us, therefore utopia contains within it some germs of dystopia as well. So both these genres developed from More's Utopia. Does that answer your question?